Clearly, today and the overall effort that Julie's now leading is very, very complex, but one with tremendous potential for leveraging the capacities we have here on campus to demonstrate what can be done in terms of the campus operations, of course, but also in terms of the broader impact from the research that supports some of that work and from the broader information and guidance that we can provide. And that's a core part of the MIT mission. So this morning, I think to kick the day off, we have a panel that's going to help provide some of that context for the rest of the day, a framing effectively for the discussion. And so with me, I have Professor Henry Jacoby, Jake, as I get to refer to him as, who is one of our eminent experts in the climate change arena. And Jake, I think, is going to be able to provide us with some context with regard to the bigger picture, which is driving all of this, and how that relates to MIT and to the sustainability effort. Jeremy Poindexter, a graduate student in the Department of Material Science and Engineering, is going to provide one of the, I think, the key elements, which is a demonstration of what the students are doing and what they can do. John Charles, who's our Vice President for IS&T, is going to speak about what IS&T is, that core element of the Institute, what they can bring to bear. And then Bina Venkataraman, who is the newly minted Director of Global Initiatives at the Broad Institute and a former Senior Advisor on Climate Change Innovation in the Obama administration, will be able to provide some context, I think, for the broader effort and how that all comes together. So with that, I think I'll open it up to some remarks from the panel, and afterwards we'll have some moderated discussion. Jake.
Okay. Well, thank you, and I thanks to Julie for giving me a chance to talk to this group. Sustainability is one of the odd words. It seems to communicate with everybody, but no one knows how to define it. And there are many issues at issue today, but I'm going to just talk about one issue where it's not hard to say what the problem is of sustainability, and that is about what's going on the climate and what it may mean for the Institute. But for purposes of this conversation, I'm just going to stipulate about the climate. We can have a discussion later if you want. But the climate is changing. It's changing in ways, events, changes in things we can observe that are consistent with what the models say is what we can expect in the longer term in greater magnitude. And the thing you have to remember, I always remember when you're shoveling snow, the mantra you say is, there's a difference between climate and weather. So don't be misled. It is happening. And the second thing is that the projections of the future indicate that the risk is really very, very great. And I will say that what's going on in the international system as the negotiations take place leading to a major event again in Paris of the Framework Convention is not optimistic about taking the measures that would be necessary to avoid or to substantially reduce this risk. Maybe more things will come later, but right now the projections of this risk are very great. And the third thing, it's a substantial risk to society, to societies and the environment. You didn't give me an hour and a half to do this. I'll just stipulate that's true. And MIT is doing a lot in this area. I mean, we don't talk about that here, but across the campus there are hundreds of people working on this issue, ranging from the psychology about how we think about this to the economics and policy analysis, what we might do about it, to work on existing and potential new technology. So there's a lot going on here. But the issue here is the campus. In the room today, the issue is the campus. And when you ask me to do this, the question is why? Why? This is a global issue. The United States is roughly 1/4 of the greenhouse gas emissions. Massachusetts is a little bit more than 2% of the United States. And MIT is a little piece of Massachusetts. Why would you worry about, why would you pay any attention to MIT's contribution. And if you think about climate changing, well, I work in an air-conditioned office. I don't have a big problem. Is that a serious issue for us at all? I mean, probably, it's far off in the future. Why do we worry about this? Why is this an issue for a discussion of the campus? And I'll just talk about two aspects of this, the two aspects about it. One is the issue of what we might do about mitigation of greenhouse gases, and the other is, are we really vulnerable here? Does it really make any difference? So, as to why we might be concerned about greenhouse gases, I think it's always good to be good. I mean, why not be moral? It's okay. We need to stay up with what the city wants us to do, what the state's doing, and if we can do things that are useful, that seems like a good thing to do. But there are other reasons, I think, that lead to a focus on the Institute taking more attention to the greenhouse gas emissions when our effect on the global problem is really insignificant. And there are three parts to it, and it's my kind of productive triangle about MIT. That is innovation, demonstration, and teaching. I mean, what we do here, it's kind of our self image of this is that we innovate. We are an analysis-driven, innovative culture. So we talk about innovation. Julie already talks about innovation. We do that. That's our kind of mission in life. But another thing that's different about MIT and a contribution to this is that we are analysis-driven. And we could tell, I'm sure Julie could tell stories about things that other institutions like us run out and do things without thinking very seriously about what they're doing. Can they meet the tasks? Can they meet the targets they pick? Are the measures they're taking really significant in terms of influencing the problem and the like? So MIT's a kind of innovative, analysis-driven culture is an important part of this. And the second part of that is then demonstration. We are visible globally for reasons that none of us created. We inherit at MIT a visibility globally for what we do, which is our inheritance. We didn't create this. And so it's an important aspect of what we do can be communicated more in terms of what the effect is on others. And of course we teach. And we teach our students, and the teaching involves the students and the staff and the faculty and the alumni and not only the people who we teach in the classroom, but a lot of the people we've had here as staff and students and faculty are now running this show in the States and Washington. So that impact is much bigger, and I think worth paying a lot more of attention to than you would expect from an insignificant effect on the emissions themselves. Are we now a natural leader? I don't know. I'm not aware of that. But certainly the opportunity is there for that reason. The second point I would make is about adaptation and resiliency. MIT is vulnerable. I do work on severe storms, sea level rise and severe storms. And looking at the projections of sea level rise, the risk of sea level rise, and what may happen in terms of a more intense storms, particularly tropical storms like hurricanes, but also the nor'easters also have an effect, are becoming more severe, are predicted to become more severe. And we're sitting here protected by the Charles River Dam and other parts of Cambridge by the dam in Medford. The risk was always there that we could have been flooded. If we had Sandy 100 kilometers, 100 miles farther north, we would have had that problem here. We were lucky, but that risk is going up, and so this campus is. Those of you who walk around the tunnels know how much of this campus, at high tide the basin is below sea level, so and a lot of this campus is below sea level now, so and it's not so the risk is going up. And I think it's something we're going to have to take very seriously here. And it's only one of the vectors of climate change, but that's the one that I think is most significant. And the other point I'll make is that the sustainability of MIT as an institution is totally dependent on the sustainability of the community we're sitting in. the city of Cambridge, the city of Boston. So that sustainability of this as an institution depends on things like the fundamental infrastructure of the city. So think about the possibility of storm damage to water and sewage, fresh pond, for example, those who drink fresh pond. Transportation systems, we've had that experience. The electric power to run the whole system. So we are dependent on those. Systems. You're going to hear more about that later in this session. And it is true that people at MIT, many of you here in the room, are actually engaged with this work that's going on in Cambridge and Boston. But MIT has, I think, a contribution to make in that beyond our own facilities, the vulnerability of our own facilities. You know, I haven't gone around to ask how many of the emergency generators are in the basement, for example, kind of a question. Do we put your generators in the basement in the Nano building? Yeah, okay. So, but one of the issues here is not just to be aware of those problems, but to do the right analysis of those problems. So one of the things where we have a contribution to make, I think, both by the staff members here who engaged with the city's work and the work of the various faculty who are engaged in doing research on these questions is to doing this right. This is a complicated question of how you adapt investment in infrastructure to an uncertain risk that's rising over time. It's our kind of problem, and one where we have a real contribution to make. So climate change is not really the only topic for today, but I would say that I love the title you pick, game changing. Choose no small goals, you say. We do want to be game changers. I don't know if we can be a game changer. I would just tell you that this is a game that we need to be in, not only for ourselves, but to help support the communities. Because when you think about the campus, you shouldn't think about the campus as sort of drawn by the boundary that we put up here. The campus is really the city, because we don't survive, we don't sustain unless the city that we're in sustains as well, and we have a contribution to make there. And then I'll just add one plug. There is the Climate Conservation Conversation Committee is running a number of events to try to draw input from the community, both to inform and draw input from the community about various issues on the climate, on MIT's response to climate. And one of those is precisely on the topic of today's session, on what we're doing with the infrastructure of the campus itself, and how we manage it, how we run it, what we should do about it, and such. So there is a session which I encourage you to attend, and I've forgotten the date, Sarah. The 12th of March. So look for that, and come and build on what goes on today, and bring that to that more public discussion where we're trying to involve not just the people who help run MIT who are sitting in this room, but a lot of the students and other people who are our clients. Thank you.
Thank you very much for having me. Indeed, it's an honor to be in this group. It's an honor to be up here on the stage. So from my perspective, I'll try to bring us in to the campus itself. Indeed, there are a number of things we can do on our campus to try to figure out, can we develop the best practices and be able to enable others to recognize these are the opportunities you should be able to apply. We have, per square foot, one of the most energy-intensive campuses in the world. And it comes from the fact that we don't have liberal arts quite as prominently as most other universities do. As a result, we have less lecture rooms and more laboratory rooms. And as a result of that, we have a lot of equipment that we need to run in all our facilities. We're also very densely packed, right? So our campus is incredibly engineered to accommodate our ability to go ahead and develop the next set of technologies. But as we look at that, we have grown the campus, indeed, one building at a time. And the question once in a while comes forward to say, well, there are some projects that indeed will unify many, many of us. One example is MIT Nano that is being constructed right now. You probably started seeing construction, roughly speaking, in June last year. And it's going to keep on going till about spring 2018. And in the constructing of this structure, the right question to ask is, can we go ahead and show the best paradigm we can imagine in what it means to develop a facility that will be used by about 2,000 individuals in the course of a year? To get you a scale of 2,000 individuals, we have about 6,600 graduate students, 4,400 undergrads, and 1,400 postdocs. So look at the postdocs and graduate students together, that's about 8,000 individuals. About a quarter of them will step in this building in the course of a year. That's an estimate, but probably an underestimate to how useful this building will be. Which really means we have an incredible way to affect the quality of research of those people, and at the same time responsibility to provide our campus the best practice in actually developing a structure like it. This is a view of MIT Nano from the Infinite Corridor that you'll be able to step in this new courtyard behind it. Here is the cross-section of it. It's entirely laboratories. It has no offices, not for students, not for faculty, few offices for staff who actually operate the facility itself. But this building is extremely intensively laboratory space. As a matter of fact, that imaging sub-fab space down in a basement, that's the quietest place, actually, and probably the least energy-intensive one. The place that you have instruments that need an extremely small vibration, a small amount of electromagnetic noise, places that you can move atoms around and image them without worrying about them getting out of your sight. And then you step into the clean rooms. And those clean rooms are 2 stories tall, each one of them. There are 2 of them. Every one of them, because one whole floor above the clean room is dedicated to fan deck, to a place that actually moves the air around. A tremendous amount of air needs to be moved, which means a tremendous amount of energy needs to be expanded in order to operate a space like this. So what are the best practices that we can apply? Well, probably many, as a matter of fact. If you look at that movement of air, is there a way to generate, to design the filters to make the path of least resistance available and yet provide the quality of the air that we need to operate a facility like this? How good of an air do we need? Actually, we need a very good air. If you have asthma or any other airborne disease, step into the clean room and you'll clarify it easily. Because there should be no dust particles floating around, at least a very small amount. Why? Because the scale that we are working at in MIT Nano is nanoscale. Nanoscale, well, dust particle is about 1,000 nanometers in size or bigger. So a dust particle is bigger than the devices we'll be playing with. We can't have dust. Well, how do you actually purify it? Well, one way to do it is to either pass your air through a filter that's small or through a filter that's big. What's the benefit? Well, if you go ahead and have a very big filter, a very thick filter, and provide a lot of space for the filtering, you might be able to actually slow down your air, not have it go quite as often. Well, actually, you have to have it go quite a bit through the filter, but the pressure per unit per square, force per square area can be reduced, and consequently, the driving force to drive through a filter can be reduced, allowing to have more efficient systems. Being able to design the space, and again, a trade-off of space in this case versus energy, was something that we considered. So looking at clean room, it's a high energy use space. There are a variety of typical designs for typical spaces. So a typical office goes through about 1 air exchange per hour. That's ACH. If you look at a conference room, it's about 2 air exchanges per hour. Laboratory, anywhere from 4 to 12. Conference rooms, indeed, I said about 2. Animal vivarium, about 15. And then comes clean room, about 250 to 500 air exchanges per hour. You need to have that many air exchanges to get rid of those dust particles. Do you need to have that many air exchanges at night? Well, depends. Depends on when the users are there. Because actually the only source of dust inside the clean room, well, the primary source of dust are the users. That users, especially if they haven't showered, you actually shed skin cells. And if you haven't gotten yourself rid of those skin cells ahead of time, that's a bit of a problem stepping into the clean room. Well, what if I can monitor the use of the clean room, find out how many users there are, find out if there is a significant amount of commotion in the room itself by monitoring both presence of individuals as well as monitoring the quality of air. I should be able to maybe slow down my air exchanges. Indeed, why do it? Why keep passing the air through the filters if the air is clean enough? So variable control of the air filtration is one of the rules we're going to be utilizing inside the building. And we can see we should be able to dramatically reduce the operation to about 100 air exchanges per hour. And even this, we think, will be an over need for what is truly needed. Now, that being said, we have looked at a variety of other things. Building like this exhausts a lot of air, a lot of poisoned air, right? Air that needs to be scrubbed out before being pushed out, but air that has been warmed up because you used it inside that place. On a day like today, right, the air we're going to be putting out would be on the 65, 70 degrees. Outside is about 20 or 30. Can you recover some of that heat before expelling it outside the building? Yes, you can. And being able to actually utilize that air recovery, heat air recovery would be a significant, again, other energy saving. There are indeed over 100 different sustainability options we considered in the course of about 9 months on what could be done for providing better operation of MIT Nano, better in the form of more sustainable operation of MIT Nano. So we have looked at trade-offs. We have looked at the first costs versus operational cost savings as time progresses. If I can slow down my fans, I can save a lot of energy. I can also save a lot of cost. I might have to have initial investment in my infrastructure that maybe exceeds what the cheapest way of building the building is, but fairly quickly I'll recover the cost. Just from a point of view even of economic arguments, you can say energy savings is a very valuable thing to do in the long run. And so looking at over 100 sustainability options, we adopted about 60. Every one of them in detail being able to provide us a clear metric on these are the amount of time that we'll be able to very quickly recover the initial cost, excess cost we'll have to incur, and then from there on have initial energy saving, excessive energy savings after that point of payback. Indeed, opportunities for utilizing our campus in the form of MIT Nano or in the form of any new structure we choose to build is incredible. We have a very old campus about to celebrate its 100th anniversary, right, in just a couple of years, next year. That being said, there are a tremendous number of opportunities to look through the campus and recognize these are the opportunities for improving it, or call it, these are opportunities for testing our best practice, utilizing our campus as a laboratory, as a place that will allow us to learn the best practice and then be able to publicize so that others can go ahead and adapt whatever we have learned. I'll stop there, and thank you for your attention.
So good morning, everyone. It's truly a pleasure for me to be here. I'm really excited to have so many great minds in one room to discuss ways that we can synthesize efforts to strengthen campus sustainability. Ostensibly, I'm here to discuss with you today work that I have helped accomplish through a class project. So just to give you some context, I'm a second-year PhD student in the Department of Mechanical Engineering. And last semester, I took a class called Fundamentals of Photovoltaics. And so these 4 students and I, Delphine, Isaac, Conrad, and Emily, sought to answer one question, which is how much solar power could MIT generate? We wanted to investigate the potential for installing photovoltaic solar panels here on campus. And so when the 5 of us met with Steve Lanoux and Sarah Berlinski at the Office of Sustainability, we were a bit surprised to learn that this isn't something that it seemed like MIT had seriously considered before, having very large-scale systems. Now, there are some systems on campus, as you can see here. There are 5 of them. And we were actually able to tour these systems as part of this class. But these systems are relatively small in size. They're less than 100 kilowatts capacity. And so they provide, at any point in time, less than 0.5% of total power to MIT. And additionally, these systems are relatively hidden. Not very many people on campus know about them, I don't think. I certainly didn't when we started this project. And so when we started this project, I sort of thought about why that was. MIT is a place where we are masters of science and engineering and technology. And it seemed to me that installing solar panels on roofs would be sort of an easy, obvious way of making campus more sustainable. But as we progressed with this project, I started to understand a bit more that projects like these, which are very large scale, are difficult and you can encounter barriers. As a materials scientist, I really like understanding what fundamentally governs behavior. And so instead of just saying that, oh, there are these barriers that we need to overcome, I want to focus on this. I want to understand what are these barriers. What do they look like? And I think they come in 3 main categories. The first kind of barriers are technical in nature. So efforts in sustainability requires synthesizing knowledge from all kinds of different fields, not only science and engineering, but economics and policy and psychology, among many others. And understanding the relationships between inputs, like materials, money, social behavior, and outputs, like carbon emissions, can be really, really complex, and those relationships can be uncertain. Additionally, there are logistical barriers. We at MIT are comprised of many different departments with our own corners of expertise, and MIT is decentralized sometimes. It can be a little bit difficult to organize people to come together, and doing that is sometimes chaotic and time-consuming and complicated. And lastly, there are social barriers. At MIT, we are students, we are faculty, staff, administrators, and alumni. And sometimes we have different viewpoints, and we are motivated by different things. I know we students sometimes can be a little bit impatient and strong-headed occasionally, but I think it's important to recognize that those kinds of differences are really motivated for the sheer amount of awe and respect that we have for this great institution. So I think that at the end of the day, working on sustainability is hard, because you encounter barriers in all three of these areas. Luckily, there are ways to overcome these barriers. And this is something that we were able to do with this class project. So before telling you how to overcome them, I'd like to just show you. So with this class project, we wanted to know how much solar power MIT could generate. And so during the class, our professor, Tony Bonacici, introduced us to this amazing tool called MapTwell, which is an online rooftop solar mapping tool. It uses LiDAR data along with satellite imagery in order to assess the potential for performance for photovoltaic systems on roof all throughout Cambridge. It turns out that this tool was developed in part by a faculty member here at MIT in the School of Architecture, Christoph Reinhardt. And so this tool is really useful in allowing us to answer this question. We calculated through MapTwell that there is around 57 football fields of area on campus. And so about half of that is usable for photovoltaic systems due to things like shading on some roofs and ventilation equipment. I'm sure there will be lots of ventilation equipment on top of MIT Nano, for example. And so with a 16% efficient solar panel, it turns out that you could install around 27.5 megawatts of capacity for solar, which is significant when compared to the peak power demand at MIT of around 25 to 30 megawatts. So this seemed really promising. So what we wanted to do in this project is go in more detail and look at specific places on campus where we could do this. So through MapTwell, what we were able to do is design sort of simulated PV systems. This image on the right shows some systems. I'm not sure if you can see, but there's small circles here which represent an individual panel. And we were able to extract statistics corresponding to how much power those systems could create and how large they would be in area and how much they would cost. But since we know that sometimes simulations only tell you so much, sometimes you need to apply real-life constraints. So we actually went up and visited some of these buildings. So this is a picture of the Zesker Center, which is one of my favorite buildings on campus for PV. It's beautiful. It is wide open. It's flat. There's not very much else on the roof. It gets sunlight at all hours of the day. So there are a few buildings like this, which I think are very promising. There were some other buildings that seemed initially very promising as well, but yielded some surprises. So the top of the library annex building here is also flat and open, but it has this interesting pebble roof structure, which I don't think many people knew was there, including the people who worked in that building. And so this taught us that sometimes you actually do just have to go and visit the location. There are some buildings on campus that surprised us, that seem more promising than we initially thought, including the building we're in right now. Despite the Media Lab's multi-tiered roof structure, there are some wide open, flat, sunlit areas. So maybe in a couple of years at this conference, this presentation will be powered by the sun. That would be cool. And lastly, there are a few buildings on campus that sort of didn't really surprise us at how poor they were for photovoltaics. And without pointing them out and naming names, I'm sure you can think of what buildings I'm talking about. So at the end of the day, we assessed that buildings like the first three that I mentioned could have the potential of providing up to 4 megawatts of solar capacity at any given time. And these are buildings that we could essentially install solar systems on immediately without really the need for some serious retrofit work. And so we're really excited about this. We pitched this idea to President Reif and Deputy Executive Vice President Tony Sharon. And we're really looking forward to working with them and taking this project outside of the classroom. So to come back to this, how are we able to overcome these barriers in this specific project? Well, on the technical side, we had the knowledge through this MapDwell tool of all of our constraints. It provided us with really valuable data that allowed us to go very far in our analysis. And we had the problem-solving framework through what we learned in lectures to be able to apply those constraints properly. On the logistical side, Steve and Sarah at the Office of Sustainability were really great resources for us and able to provide us with information we wouldn't have otherwise had access to and give us some insight about how it would be, how we could implement this kind of thing at MIT with other departments. And as I mentioned, administrators have been really receptive to this idea. And really, that's sort of why I'm standing here right now, today. And lastly, it's the common values that all of us in this room share, really caring about sustainability, that made this project possible in the first place. And so the students, administrators, faculty, and staff really are passionate about this work. And that is a huge part of what made this possible. Now, what about this last thing, momentum? We know that from physics, momentum is a force applied over time, right? And sometimes forces can be external in nature. Perhaps all of us are sitting in this room today because we read the MIT mission statement, which says that we seek to develop in each member of the MIT community the ability and passion to work wisely, creatively, and effectively for the betterment of humankind. That's a very noble sentiment, and I think that that sentiment is reflected in a lot of the work that we do here at MIT. But as I've learned as a material scientist, I think that the strongest forces in nature are often internal. So what I challenge you all to do today is to really think about deeply why you're here in this seat, what brought you here today, what motivates you, and to share that with your colleagues sitting next to you here, and share that with the people that aren't in this room, because that is what we need in order to build on this momentum. And we're fortunate that that momentum has already been building. There are thousands of students, faculty, staff, and alumni at this institute calling for the institute to take stronger leadership in climate change, for example, by divesting the endowment from fossil fuels. There is, as has been mentioned, this MIT climate change conversation going on, where we can discuss ways to increase sustainability, including installing solar panels on roofs. And so I think that if we can tap into that, then we really have the ability to overcome these barriers. Because here at MIT, we're some of the best problem solvers in the world. We have a wide array of resources that we have access to. And so if we can really build on the momentum that we have already helped establish, that's already going on, I see really great things for us ahead. So with that, I look forward to working on sustainability and talking about more specific ways to synthesize efforts to strengthen campus sustainability. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Julie, for inviting me to be a part of this. This is a very special event, and I'm excited to be here this morning. As all of you probably realize, we live in two worlds today. We live in the the biosphere, and we also live in the technosphere. And in the biosphere, it's comprised of a complex web of nodes, these ecosystems. And something bad happens somewhere within the biosphere. Other components just kick in and naturally, restore balance, to that ecosystem. Over the next few minutes, what I plan to do is talk to you about why I believe the interconnected roles of big data and the Internet of Things can help us create within the technosphere the characteristics that start to mimic the biosphere in ways that could end up being a key to how we can scale sustainable living. big data sometimes referred to as the digital exhaust of our digital world, but it actually can be thought of as a new natural resource. Big data with its ability to provide the high-speed analysis and large volumes of data and varieties of data, they can help deliver a real-time situational awareness that wasn't possible for us in the technosphere not too long ago. And then the Internet of Things, with its ability to interconnect devices, smart devices, and deliver this web of nodes. So together, when you put these characteristics together in a synergistic way, they have the ability for relaying information and for forming a responsive system. These are some of the essential characteristics of what we would need to be able to mimic the biosphere within the technosphere and restore balance when bad things happen. So consider the potential implications for sustainable living. Currently, those of us that live sustainably do so out of choice. We decide and we make a conscious decision that we're going to alter our behavior. Okay, and some things are set and forget. It's like installing solar panels. You've done it. You kind of forget. Changing out your light bulbs to LED bulbs, kind of a set and forget things. But when it comes to ongoing behavior, things get a little bit messier. We forget to unplug our chargers. We get lazy because there's extra things, because we're choosing to alter our behavior and living sustainably. So furthermore, I would argue that no amount of campaigning is ever going to significantly change this kind of convenience-driven majority behavior that all of us kind of default back into. People naturally tend to use the things in precisely the way they were designed, and unfortunately, a lot of things were not designed with energy conservation, in mind. So now imagine if all the things that we currently associate with sustainable living could be automated in ways that we didn't really have to think about them. Our lights would only come on when we come near them. They would come on to the brightness that was necessary for whatever activity we were engaged in. Our devices would only charge themselves when the energy was the cheapest. Our gardens even, would only water on an hourly basis based upon full knowledge of the latest weather predictions, maybe soil and air moisture sensors, and perhaps even knowledge of what plants are actually in the garden and what kind of watering they need. So these types of behaviors are behaviors of devices within a technosphere that really begin to mimic the best characteristics of a sustainable ecosystem. So as the technology becomes more instrumented, more interconnected, and more intelligent, we have the interconnected roles of big data and the Internet of Things helping us learn how to listen to the data rather than to the hippo. The hippo, by the way, that's the highest paid person's opinion. So listening to the data and also learning, helping us to learn to trust the real-time optimization of resources that these smart devices acting in real time can actually provide for us. So, as the use of big data and the Internet of Things becomes more ubiquitous in our lives, such automation of resource optimization can become, sort of a background, that reality for everyone. Sustainable living could become the new default. So the shift, from a heavy focus on personal responsibility to enabling a new default reality really could be a game-changing opportunity for us. MIT, with its maker culture, is uniquely positioned to exploit the interconnected roles of big data and the Internet of Things. It can really help accelerate the emergence of this new sustainable living ecosystem. So to wrap this up, the consumer marketplace, as we all know, has been on fire with innovation over the past several years. And successes like the iPhone and the iPad and the Android, these platforms, have demonstrated the important role that needs to be played by user-created applications. And MIT can do a number of things here to help accelerate this new model by leveraging platforms and API approach to these platforms where users can actually start developing apps. Some of the things that we can do is help define the relevant data types and relationships for strongly interconnected data. These things would be timestamps, location, things of that nature. We can build mashups for blending machine-to-machine data and behavior data to create what we might call smart data. These would be such things that involve capturing attitudes, choices, interactions, activity patterns. And we can enable faculty, staff, and students to leverage the smart data to create new models for pattern recognition, new predictive algorithms for use in automating relationships between their devices, and then by making MIT data open for reuse and redistribution, and by enabling others to opt in. So collectively, these types of efforts can become the game-changing key to accelerating the emergence of a sustainability ecosystem within the technosphere and help us actually scale sustainable living. So that's what we're trying to help enable within IS&T.
How can MIT be a true force for leadership in climate change innovation? So it's clear we're in an era of disruptions and that that's happening at the planetary scale, but also here locally in Boston and the region, and that is something to be reckoned with, both from the point of view of resilience and how we prepare for those impacts of climate change, but also how we think about MIT's leadership role in shifting the conversation around energy, which is, of course, happening here, both through scholarship, through practice and engagement, and through teaching. But it always is worth, I think, taking a step back and looking at the horizon and asking what can be done going forward. So my work in Washington and at the White House was focused really around three questions. First, how can we leverage and import the most exciting innovations in science and technology to be deployed for the problem of climate change? So things like big data analytics and the Internet of Things and artificial intelligence that are transforming other aspects of society. How do we engage and deploy those technologies to address one of the biggest challenges that humanity faces, which is climate change? And second, how do we innovate the realms of science and technology themselves to be more responsive to and create more solutions to the energy crisis, to the resilience and preparedness challenges we face around extreme weather and floods, heat waves, droughts, et cetera. And then finally, what are the policy mechanisms? How do policies need to change in order to enable those innovations to come to the fore? So given that work and that perspective, I see sort of three areas of opportunity for universities in particular, but I would say MIT especially, because MIT has been at the forefront of not only technology and technology innovation, of basic research, but also of the intersection of research and practice historically. And that is a crucial area where we're going to need an incredible amount of activity and engagement if we intend to really face this challenge. So the first opportunity I see is really in building a marketplace for climate change risk information. So what do I mean by that? At this moment in time, we have an abundance of information about how the planet is changing and how the impacts of that change are playing out on the regional basis and to some degree on the local basis. We know that we are in the short term seeing extreme weather. In 2012 alone in this country, there was about $110 billion worth of economic damage as a result of extreme weather events. We also know that we are seeing long-term change, long-term sea level rise. But that information is by and large not being factored in, the risk information, into the decisions that people are making in communities, at the citizen level, and in companies. So most people don't buy a house based on even the information about the historical floodplain, let alone the floodplain going forward under sea level rise. Most companies are looking at time horizons of about 1 to 3 years when they're looking at risks, and they're not really factoring in near-term risks of climate change. Some of that is changing, of course. And communities, increasingly cities, are very concerned with climate change. We know that Boston and Cambridge are, and many of you are probably in this room, are familiar with some of the work being done. But cities are striving, or grappling and grasping to find relevant information. How do they use the National Climate Assessment or the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change reports to actually make decisions about infrastructure or about social networks or about how they think about planning going forward? So there's a gap in that knowledge. And that's a huge opportunity. It's an opportunity, but it's also a serious challenge for the scientific enterprise, because the scientific enterprise around climate change is focused on much more fundamental questions. People don't make decisions based on average sea surface temperatures. On the other hand, that's foundational knowledge that's critical to understanding the planetary system. But it presents a new opportunity to sort of see how we can contextualize information for the kinds of decisions people make. And the Weather Service provides a good example of how this is done. People look at weather information based on weather data to make decisions about whether to harvest and when to make shipments. Similarly, in the field of medicine, we have clinical practice, where people make decisions amid uncertainty based on biomedical research, but they're able to make operational decisions in light of that uncertainty. So that's opportunity one. Opportunity two is really around technologies and innovations at scale. And there were some great comments made here about ways that MIT is already deploying particular innovations on campus and demonstrating those. And of course, MIT has a long history of commercializing science, commercializing technologies. The range of technologies that are going to be needed on climate change are probably well known to a lot of folks in this room, include everything from energy storage technologies to sensor and mobile technologies, to renewable energy sources, the deployment of solar at scale. But a university can do much more than just commercializing those technologies. It can also articulate a path for how those technologies get deployed. And I think this is a challenge and an opportunity going forward for the Institute to really think about how to articulate the policies and the processes that are needed to get those technologies adopted, and to be a demonstrable leader in making the case for how technologies get deployed at scale. I also think that the example of the Internet of Things, Dr. Charles' presentation, is a great example of another role the Institute can play in terms of technologies and innovations, because there's a real need to make the connection between how the technologies that are transforming other aspects of life or transforming business sectors, to show how those are relevant to the problem of climate change. And that's a public good problem. You don't necessarily have a full-fledged market for doing that yet. And it's hard for government to be as nimble enough to demonstrate these technologies. So I think it's a real role for MIT to say, we're going to envision how artificial intelligence and big data are going to transform climate change, and we're going to make clear those connection examples. We're going to demonstrate in situ how that's possible. The third opportunity set is around models for managing change. So as has been mentioned here, climate change is a problem that spans geographic boundaries. It also spans time horizons and jurisdictional boundaries. And there's a lot of grappling happening at the national level, at the global level, with how we manage these problems, because sea level rise is not going to happen even within the context of the city of Cambridge. It's happening on a regional level. And we need new institutions and new approaches for how we address that set of challenges. And increasingly, I think there's a need for a convening function for universities to bring together the players from private, public sector to actually make and chart those new governance structures. The Northeast and New England has a great record of doing this. We have the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative here, which is our regional cap and trade approach. There are networks, national and global networks of cities coming to the fore. But the challenges are going to be adaptive. They're going to be happening over time. And it's a role that MIT, I think, can play very strongly going forward. Also, I think MIT can work very deeply within its geography. And I'm thrilled to hear about the work that's happening with the city of Cambridge, with the city of Boston, with the region, because we need models of how different sectors work together within a sandbox to address this problem over time. I'll just close by noting 3 qualities that MIT already has that I think can aid in the fermentation of its leadership to seize these 3 opportunities. So the first is that MIT has a uniquely long-term perspective and an ability to harness that perspective at the institutional level to make decisions. We sometimes take this for granted because when we're within a community, we sometimes can't always see its value relative to other sectors. But in the corporate sector, decisions are being made on the basis of quarterly profits and sometimes these 1 to 3 year risk horizons. In the public sector, you have election cycles and leaders that are accountable for the next election, but maybe not looking decades into the future. And that, I think, is a unique position and perspective that MIT can offer that going forward as an institution, to avoid baking in decisions that might be expedient over a 10-year horizon, but might not be the best solutions to, say, reducing emissions over a 50-year time horizon. And we can talk about what examples of that would be. The second quality that I think MIT has that it can leverage to this and bring to this set of issues and challenges is its ability to capture the imagination of people in terms of how technology gets deployed. A big failure mode in sort of the regulations that are limiting science and technology and innovation deployment on climate change is failure of the imagination. The failure to be able to understand how if we made regulatory tweaks, if we created the right incentives, we could actually deploy particular technologies to transform our approach to climate change. This is an image of the MIT Media Lab. It's from Joe Paradiso's group, Responsive Environments Group, and it shows the heat and electricity and human footprint of this building. And it's a sort of sensor-based Internet of Things approach that could be used to be applied to making buildings much more efficient, to making systems more efficient, to help with disaster evacuation and risk. But people have to imagine how that can be applied. And MIT has an abundance of researchers and programs that could be ways of demonstrating that. Finally, MIT is a dynamic institution. It has historically adapted and evolved to challenges and to new technologies. The challenge I would pose is that MIT can and should evolve the role of scientists and of its scholarship and its campus operations to help develop what I would call a clinical practice for climate change. And this is the space that I was talking about that goes between the basic science of how the Earth system is changing and the climatic disruptions and the practical operational decisions that companies need to make in sectors from agriculture to finance to the decisions that communities need to make, cities, regions, states, and nations. And to do this, I think it does require an evolution to some degree in the roles that researchers play and the roles that staff and faculty and students play to go beyond the research and to articulate the ingredients needed at the policy level for the deployment of technologies and innovations. Thank you.
I just want to kick things off a little bit with a reflection that you made, Jake, that it was good to be good, which I think we would all agree, right? Clearly, everybody has that ambition. But I think where the gulf sometimes exists is, of course, in the operationalization of that goal, of that ambition. And that's something that I think you guys are facing, Vladimir, with respect to MIT Nano, which is a very tangible and large element in MIT's kind of medium-term future investment-wise. And these decisions had to be made. I'm kind of curious how you've been able to go through this process, how it has differed perhaps from the process in its kind of typical sense in the contemporary paradigm, and your reflections on whether or not in reality it's much more difficult to do something different, or is it just kind of a mindset change?
I think actually you're asking a fantastic question from perspective of building industry that is often very conservative in adapting the next technology. After all, the building needs to stand for the next 100 years. And there are proven methods of building it that will make sure it operates for those 100 years in a proper way. You can step back and look at a typical research lab like MIT Nano. It's really meant to operate in this modality for about 30 years. Now, that allows you a little bit shorter horizon and a little bit more confidence, although still 3 decades is a long time. In 3 decades, I say, we'll invent anti-gravity, we'll have a whole bunch of physics and science that will allow us to redesign the lab. I mean, but the building will stand there. So the ability to actually introduce entirely new technology led us to quantify tremendously every step of the way. It took about 9 months. Now, bear in mind, anything as big as MIT Nano, a single month of delay is millions of dollars of extra cost. So you have to be cognizant of where you stand, what the opportunity is, and indeed work extremely hard at quantifying those opportunities. We also looked at CO2 emissions of the building and asked ourselves a very simple question, which is that, I can do something today to reduce the CO2 emission, but would it be better if I actually used that money and planted trees in Brazil, right? Or in Cambridge area? Would that do more CO2 reductions than investing millions and millions and millions to just do a little bit of extra CO2 emissions? So I think weighing the pros and cons and trying to have, because there are another few hundred things we could have done, right? At an exorbitant cost that would have caused us not to build a building whatever. So you have to do very, very careful analysis of balancing the two and then be extremely persuasive and use the MIT's ability to say, well, these are the numbers, we have quantified it. There is no reason why this shouldn't work based on the physics and science we understand. Let's try it out.
I guess where I'm going with that question is, I think the first of is always a big step forward. But, having gone through this experience, do you see the opportunity for not just MIT, but more broadly, when investment decisions around these types of facilities are being made, that a planning process that's that's less of an arduous kind of lift can be developed, but at the same time capture all the color and opportunity that exists?
I think the lift will always be arduous in the sense that we'll always have to spend a lot of time thinking. It's not a simple problem anytime we introduce a global change. I think what does help tremendously is to share the experience. Our goal once the building is built is to actually write it up, right? Go ahead and say, this is how it performs. We expected this, we got this. We should use our campus as a lab project itself. Us building one good building is not going to save the world. But us building a building that others can learn from might advance the moment forward.
Right.
Us building a lot of solar panels on the campus is a really good idea, but only if people can see them so that we can appreciate the value of technology, right? And hence be able to engage in it to develop even better technology that builds from it.
So actually, that's an interesting, useful linkage. Thank you, Vladimir. Because I was curious, Jeremy, in your exercise, so I think you articulated pretty clearly, you and the group were passionate about trying to bring this apparently quite obvious opportunity to kind of fruition effectively. And then you kind of stepped into the complexity of the institution, of course, institutions in general, and all of the varying factors that matter. And, I'd like to know, one, from your perspective, how useful that process was, and do you think having more effective communication of those complexities to students and future decision makers, and indeed to people here in this room who have to kind of manage the place whilst trying to accommodate these opportunities. Do you think we can align and move forward trying to grasp some of these opportunities better because of that process?
I certainly hope so. And at the outset of our project, it was a class on photovoltaics, and so we wanted to undergo a project that involved applying some of the technical constraints of, how a solar cell actually works and integrating that into a module, but also from the implementation side of what would it take to actually do this on a campus, in a campus setting, in an urban setting like MIT. And so there were sort of several different ways we could have gone with the project. We could have spec'd out particular panels from a specific solar panel installation company or done the engineering work to analyze the kind of mounting that we would need to make sure that panels on a specific building could be, could withstand high winds and things like that. And we decided not to do that because what we really wanted to offer to the Institute and to the Office of Sustainability, whom we worked with, was a framework for approaching this kind of problem and demonstrating the kinds of things that you would need to think about when undergoing a project like this. And so we looked at some of the general design constraints. We looked at the existing systems that were installed starting in 2004. That have various different mounting configurations. And so going through and looking at those systems was really interesting to us, and we learned a lot of things about, these are the kinds of issues that would need to be sorted out. We learned that the installation on the alumni pool, for example, We visited in early December, and it was winter, and around half of the installation was shaded by the sun due to buildings 16 and 56. And first thing you think about when installing solar panels are, well, they need to be lit with sunlight. And so that was sort of an obvious thing that we thought of that seemed to have been overlooked. But it's just easy to, when doing that for the first time, to not think about what specific day in December might cause shading. Right. And so going through that process was really, really helpful. And I'm happy to have been able to contribute to that and deliver a report to the Office of Sustainability, which I hope anyone who's interested in reading can access.
In terms of the campus, right, you went and you saw this plethora of roof types that we happen to have. And then you made a comment about Vladimir putting all these fans on the roof. Are there simple but at least sensible steps that can be taken going forward for the Institute in terms of its consideration of its physical plant and design that will become enabling? Not necessarily let's do it, but make sure that we have a fit-for-purpose infrastructure so that these opportunities can be taken advantage of if the economics, for example, make sense.
Right, and I think that is something that is really important to consider. And sort of as was mentioned earlier, I think that piece of it is a little bit of a mindset shift. Campus sustainability is something that we're here today talking about and saying it's really important, but we also need to integrate that into our thinking so that it's just second nature to think, oh, we're building a new building on campus. How much could we install solar panels on the roof? What would that look like? Right. And making that that extends to not just solar, it extends to building energy efficiency, green labs, all these kinds of things. So I think that sort of really passionately advocating for these steps and creating that kind of mind shifts switch is what's really important. And I think that there are sort of a few reasons why that's important. First, I think it would be important for MIT to take initiative in sort of personal responsibility, and reducing carbon emissions is one way to do that, however small they may be.
Right.
But secondly, demonstration is important. Yep. And other institutions can learn how we at MIT handle this issue and go through all of these really complex analyses. And that leads into the third thing, which is MIT really being a leader for this and connecting that aspect of it to all the other things on campus, like learning about solar energy in class, engaging with research activities going on campus. And I think that is how this can really start to build and disseminate through the rest of campus and across the globe.
John, other than your hippo comment, which will stay with me for the rest of my life, one thing that really resonated from your comments was the vision of big data, if you wish, the exhaust of our digital world as a natural resource. And one of the key elements to, or key characteristics of a natural resource is that initially, when you start developing them, it's really easy. There's huge gains. It's really low cost, actually. And yeah, later on it gets more difficult, it gets more expensive. But I think today, in terms of this conversation, we have yet to begin the development of utilizing what data has to offer in terms of insight and in terms of helping to shift our thinking and helping to identify opportunity and so on. And I'm just curious in terms of the more kind of a more operational example. Have you guys looked around at the information we have on campus or that we could easily get our hands on and then considered how we could use that in order to kind of move us forward with this kind of sustainability goal?
I think most of the data, I can't put a number on it, but I would expect it's pretty much in the high 90s, is dark data right now. It's data that's out there, but we don't have any way of getting at it or looking at it or analyzing it. So there's it is an untapped resource, at this point, but it does have the potential to fuel innovation in a way that we haven't been able to fuel innovation, before. So it's a pretty exciting time, but it means that, for example, on IS&T, the path forward is not having a bunch of report writers that can go write reports against the data warehouse.
Right.
We actually have to have data scientists, that can actually work with these structured and unstructured data from a variety of sources, put them together, come up with learn how to use the tools, what tools are available now, but create new tools for analyzing that data so it's no longer dark.
Yes. So since you're actually part of the administration, I'm going to ask maybe a slightly pointy question, but so that's certainly a very interesting vision. But of course, it's all about making use of that in the operational context. So, today, do you believe that, we exist within MIT in a rather siloed organizational structure where, for example, some of the insights from within IS&T or maybe within facilities don't cross over effectively? That's a question. And if that is true, how do we move to a situation where we at least disseminate this information more effectively?
Whenever we're trying to get to the, to operationalize this, there's some infrastructure work that has to be done.
Right.
So job one for us within IS&T is to get the platforms in place, get the tool sets in place, get the connectors in place that people can then tap into data in richer ways. I think just from watching what people have been able to do with mashups involving map data.
Yes.
With very simple tools, taking a spreadsheet and then being able to mash it up with map data, geography, geotype data, can be very, very powerful. So we just have to take that to the next level in terms of dealing with data in more sophisticated ways.
So, Ben, I'm kind of curious with your, particularly in DC, in terms of the thinking that has surrounded climate change innovation and making it tangible. I'm sure some of these issues pop up all the time. So lots of good intentions, but a challenge in integrating that for action. So, can you reflect on what you guys have seen and how people are approaching that?
One of my charges was to look across. We have a $2.5 billion investment in global research annually, our federal government. And if you look across those data assets, it's everything from satellites like the NASA GRACE satellites that are taking measurements of changes in the Earth's gravitational pull that tell us about the drawing down of aquifers, like the Central Valley Aquifer in California right now, which has become very drawn down, to data, observational service data taken, to experiments, to epidemiological data connecting disease and heat. And the question becomes, how do you answer questions from these vast data sources, right? The potential we know is great because data analytics is transforming many aspects of the economy, and it's really the future in terms of knowledge and information. And knowledge and information, I would argue, are very much going to be central to, at a minimum, our resilience and preparedness approaches, but probably mitigation too.
Right.
But so how do you turn these vast amounts of data that are in disparate kinds of formats and different disparate silos into real intelligence, operational intelligence, where you can make decisions, where you could have the city of Chicago being able to create a map that shows where its elderly populations are, overlaid with its risk of heat waves prospectively going forward, overlaid with decisions being made about how they're going to deal with the built infrastructure and green space, and then you could make intelligent decisions based on those data. And that's actually a very simple example compared to the kinds of things you would hope to be able to do and need to be able to do. But to actually do that, right, it requires an integration across these different sources, from federal data all the way down to local data, from the scientific data to what's in the environment. So I think the issue, to me, it goes back to this issue of governance and models for making change. Because when you have a problem that complex, you're not going to be able to solve it even if you had a hammer as big as the federal government, right? You have to think about how you create sandboxes where different players can come together and are willing to work together. And if you take that to the institute level here at MIT, you could create the sandbox of a particular problem where you need data to come to bear on that problem and bring in the resources from different places, work the problem with data scientists, work it with beautiful data visualizations like what folks are doing here at the Media Lab, and have that be an example of how you cut through some of those, I think, logistical issues.
That then leads me to you, Jake. I didn't forget you, obviously. But as an experienced operator, both in terms of in academia and in teaching, and also, I guess, in administration across various roles in this area, I'm curious as to your reflections on this challenge of linking the macro to the micro, to the to the MIT level, demonstrating the usefulness or utility of an effort, and then scaling that back up. Because, as you said, we're in the business of teaching, and ultimately a lot of these, the real world experiments, the real world choices that are made here through osmosis can hopefully propagate out, and that's one of the big opportunities we have. So, Phil, let us know what you think.
I think of that differently.
Yeah.
Depending on who you're talking about.
Right.
So if you talk about me personally and my house and my car and stuff, that's one set of questions about how I respond to a global picture when what I do is what I do, but nobody notices what I do.
Yes.
But MIT is different in that there's a demonstration function here as to what we do, so I think that when we take these kinds of activities, increasing costs at the margin in order to achieve some goal, which is outside nanos research or whatever, or heating the buildings or what we're doing, then the question is, what we need to be thinking. We start with what we think that the risk is and what's needed, and then the question is, what can we contribute to that beyond just a few tons of CO2.
Yep.
And so it's a different question. It's a different question here. And so when I think about what Jeremy was talking about, I love it because, again, there's this great idea, and the question is, where'd that come from? Oh, students did that. That was a student initiative. Over and over, this happens. But then the question, if you're going to do, the way I think of going from the big problem to the small problem, back to the big problems. I think about that question, and if you're going to go to the next step, we're going to actually put money into this. Then what is the question? And it seems to me the question is a two-part question. What is the cost to MIT at the margin for doing that? Just looking at the cost to MIT,
right? And
is that cost somehow related to what the society believes is the marginal cost of these kinds of emissions? You have that information, but that's not the only information you want. Then you want to think about, well, how would we do this in such a way that you would have a bigger effect through demonstration? And here I'll just quote our work on the solar business. The problem of solar energy is not primarily to put modules on roofs right now. We need solar energy at very, very large scale in the very long term. And the major challenge with solar is to bring those costs of the modules and what it takes to install them and how they integrate into the system into a point where they can actually compete in the system we have. We hope with charges against the emissions of the fossil.
Sure.
So the question is, if you're going to design that kind of a system, what I would want to see is not only to design where you find a building and where's a cheap building to do that, but how would we do that to have the maximum demonstration outside? That's how you get back from the local back up to the larger problem.
Right. I think it's, just reflecting a little bit more on that, I think that's an example of where the Institute has a goal, and Jeremy literally put it up there, that's our goal. But of course, we all then, within the Institute, have our own particular job to do. And I think at times there's a disconnect between me doing my job and me doing my job to the very best alignment with the Institute's goal, and that's a real challenge. So we have a few minutes for questions, if there are a few. Thoughtful questions, of course, only.
Like yours, you mean.
Yeah, like mine, yes. Better questions than mine, please.
Thank you. So John Sturman from the Sloan School. So very interested in all of these comments, and I just wanted to offer a couple of data points on the issues that have been coming up. You know, Vlad, how much does it really cost using the numbers? Jeremy, your presentation as well. So at the new Sloan School building, we've been studying for several years how much it actually cost in additional upfront capital to make that building a LEED Gold, more green building compared to the standard building we could have bought. There'll be a case study published on this in the next couple of months, but the bottom line is the net present value of the sustainability initiatives for that building is $10 million with essentially no risk, off-the-shelf, ready-to-go technologies. And the upfront capital cost delta was roughly zero. And one of the main reasons for that is if it's more energy efficient, the mechanical systems are smaller, and also we avoided capital cost for the steam generation and chilled water capacity that the building would otherwise have required. So this is very different than what most people think. Having done formal surveys and informal surveys about this, most people think when you ask them what would the additional upfront capital costs be, 20% more is the modal answer, and the answer is really about zero. And we think the same opportunities exist for the entire campus, our study of that, and there's a paper on this now available. Very conservative assumptions suggest the NPV of an energy efficiency focus for campus renewal programs that Israel described is $100 million, and that's a very conservative number. So there's a lot of misconceptions out there about how much does this really cost and how hard is it. It turns out it's just a lot easier being green than people think. Interested in your comments.
I am a tremendous supporter of what Sloan School has done. There is a lot of monitoring of the brightness of the light throughout the system. There's computational power that goes there that's minimal compared to the amount of heat that you indeed are benefiting from saving. But you are using variable speed motors that are not standard in industry, and consequently there is a delta cost increase in the beginning. I do not know that it's exactly zero. At the end of the day, I think a lot of what I hear, at least from the building industry, is that tremendous amount of monitoring already exists in nearly every building that's newly built. But only about 10% of the data is truly used in operation of the building. And a lot of it has to do with the fact that what if you mess up? I mean, if you actually, there is a lack of daring, call it, or actually maybe the way of putting it is, if I miscalibrate the building and I start using a ton of extra electricity and a ton of extra heat, there's cost to that, right? A very large cost. So maybe all we need is grants, research grants that would subsidize the cost of fuel in the case we mess up, right? And if we happen to have a surplus at the end because we actually have gained tremendous amount of value from the new way of operating the building, we can then go ahead and return it back to whoever gave us the chance to try stuff out. I think one thing we're not doing is not doing experiments on large scale because we're a little bit concerned about what would happen to a building as a result of us trying things. And we need a backup from someone, from some sort of, is it government agency to let us try these things, or is it campus at large to go ahead and allow us to experiment with a campus, try out, and hence provide the best practice for others to follow. MIT Nano will also be LEED Gold.
This is a very interesting example of the challenge, right? Because the Sloan building, tremendous as its performance has been and so on, is an entirely different paradigm to what you guys are challenged with creating. And I think these are excellent goals, and I think we need to clearly, the comparison between what we can achieve with these different facilities is something that's complex and that has to be built into all of this process.
One way to do that calculation, I'm not sure if you did or not, is when you do those calculations also to include a shadow price on carbon emissions, if you did that or not. But that's another way to impose this kind of thing internally in doing those calculations. The other point I would make is that there's a certain level of investment that pays off a lot, but you always could do more.
Yes.
There's always more to spend and more to spend and more to spend at higher and higher costs. So it's not as if there's either a clean building or not a clean building. There's a if you pardon the economist, there's a rising cost curve for that, and the question is, where do you want to be on the cost curve?
I think
that's the question. That's the problem you have.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think your suggestion of generating reports, indeed, the studies of the future of the best building using, is it new data analysis or is it indeed new paradigms on how you heat or cool. I mean, technology can do tremendous things. And again, it's a very large investment to do an experiment on a building. However, if we are serious about making a change, without trying stuff out, without trying new technologies, without imagining at least new technology, we won't get there. I think one of the most powerful things Energy Initiative has done is generated a series of reports that talk about the future of coal, the future of natural gas, the future of natural energy. I mean, these are the things that actually people spend time debating what are the technical opportunities for change. And indeed, these reports address the policy and the social impact as well as technology. That comprehensiveness, there are very few places in the world can do that. MIT is one of those places. So we should use it as a resource for the rest of the world.
You can also share lessons about the process. So this particular example of the solar potential work that's being done here, there's UCLA is working with the city of Los Angeles to essentially share a process, a mapping tool for evaluating solar potential across the entire city. So when something's being done here internally, it's not just the technology you can demonstrate, it's the process for arriving at where you did in terms of when does the investment become worth it. And obviously there are different considerations because of the time horizons, which we talked about before. But I think that's also very valuable.
It's the process, as you found out, of course, that's really the critical path for many of these decisions. And just coming back to your point with regard to the building, so as you know, the builders want to build to code. So this question of, well, we can do this is interesting and very important, but it's really a case of moving the goalposts for everybody, because that's the process that will ultimately have impact. And if we can be a test bed for doing that, then I think that's really very, very exciting. I think we have time for one more remark or comment.
We really have the expertise across the board to deal with whether it's the policy issues, whether it's how we do the financial cost, as well as the technology. And in some ways in the past, we've done this in sort of an informal way, where we tried to get involved on some of these particular projects, and Vlad knows about, we're pushing them on MIT Nano. But in some cases, it's sort of disquieting because a number of us are doing more work away from MIT, whether it's in China or India or Europe, on trying to advance these technologies than what we're doing here on campus. And we really need to think of a formal way, and hopefully with the Office of Sustainability, we'll be able to do this now, formal way to try and marshal these resources so we can do it here on campus in a better way than we've done in the past. I think there's lots of things that we really could accomplish, whether it's from research or classroom exercises or mini consulting kinds of things where we could move forward in this.
Thank you, Leon. I think that's actually an excellent note to end things on. It's from what I've heard this morning and from Julie's office, it's entirely apparent the tremendous opportunity we have, and also, of course, this significant challenge in seizing as much of that opportunity as possible here on campus and using that and amplifying that to have impact more broadly as well in supporting MIT's broader mission. So let me thank Vladimir, Bina, John, Jeremy, and Jake for your fantastic contribution, and thank you all for your attention.